Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and it's been dumping here in the Pacific Northwest. And guess what? I've missed it all so far. I'm a total idiot, but you knew that. While my goal was to head up last week, I got in our car, the one we recently bought to replace the one that my wife totaled, and I was stoked to get on my way. I get about 25 minutes out from the summit at Snoqualmie, and I realize I have problems. You see, I've been kind of a jackass the past few years, and I've relied on all-season tires to get me to the mountains. And while they were sketchy at times, they worked okay. But I didn't even think about the tires on the new car until I started drifting on the highway in snow that those all-season tires would have handled easily. These new tires absolutely sucked. And it was scary, and if I kept going, I was going to crash, get stuck, or cause a major delay. So I made the call to turn it around and came home to watch the Seahawks win and not make the playoffs. While I wanted to shred, I made the smart choice. I mean, we've all seen idiots in our social feed who don't think good tires matter. If you haven't, go follow Kooks of Stevens Pass and you'll see what I'm talking about. I will say, turning around wasn't my only smart decision, because I'm happy to say that this week, I put some badass snow tires on my car and I'm not going to miss shit anymore. And I'll say that badass tires are what my guest this week built his pro ski career on. Colby West didn't start skiing until he was a teenager, but he was hooked quickly. So much so that he eventually dropped out of college, bought his dad's car, and lived in it while chasing the dream for a couple seasons. And that chase worked out better than Colby could possibly have imagined. From X Games podiums to filming with Matchstick Productions to becoming a founding member of the traveling fraternity of 2000s contest skiers. Colby made a name for himself both on snow and off, as Colby's talents go far beyond sliding on snow. I personally believe that Colby's voice is going to take him further than his ski career did at some point. And I know that you've all heard some of Colby's voices. Every single intro voice that I've used over the years on this podcast is Colby West's, and I should have him record some new ones for me soon. Before we get into the podcast, I want to ask you to tell a buddy about the show and subscribe and review wherever you listen. It really does help the podcast grow, and I'm all about growth. I also want you to support the incredible brands that make this podcast happen. They are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Stanley, Elon Skis, Outdoor Research, and Best Day Brewing. Now, let's talk with Colby West.
I remember when you told me you were going to have a child, and I don't think I've seen you since then.
We have seen each other. We saw each other once at a McConkey event.
Right, but I haven't met the child.
No, you haven't met the child. I will send you a picture of him after this, and I think you'll get a laugh out of it.
Oh my God, does it look just like you?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's given he's changed a little bit, but yeah, he definitely looks a lot like me. It's funny how that works. I guess you know it's yours when that happens.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty good.
Yeah, we didn't have to do a blood test or anything. And then she didn't have to do one either because they were confident it was hers too. So it's like, we are the parents.
Oh, good, because it was inside of her?
Yeah, and it wasn't like faked or anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just going to jump into this podcast. We'll start going.
Well, I thought we were going already.
No, I mean, maybe some of that'll make it in there, but that was more about me and stuff than you, and this is all about you.
Okay.
Yeah, so you are known for a lot of things. One of them is your incredible vocal talents. And to start things off, have you developed any new voices in the 20s, and can you share a couple of them? And I love that I said the 20s to talk about the 2020s. I've never done that before.
No, I got nothing. I've been just smoking. I'm all done now with voices. Yeah.
Actually, I could do maybe like a 1920s voice from like 1920s.
All right, let's hear that one.
Actually, I don't know. What do they sound like? Like, yeah, see? Is that the 20s or is that the 30s?
I don't know. You're the voice guy, so you could tell me it's the 20s and I'm going to believe you.
I feel like the 1920s. Oh, man. When was Mark Twain? Is he like the 1800s or is he early 19s?
I don't even want to answer it because I'm just going to sound stupid. So I have no idea. I'll let you sound stupid there. I'm not sure when he was.
So I'm a fucking idiot.
All right. Well, we're just going to go to your childhood then. We're going to talk a little bit about voices later on. But childhood for you is a little different than most people I have on the podcast. You're pretty much in a divorced family from the get-go. Did your folks fight when they were in the same room? Or did they make sure they were never in the same room?
Well, I don't know. They were divorced when I was like 2.
Yeah.
So I don't really have any memories of them fighting because they were already like separated.
But when you saw them as a kid, because I think they lived like in the same town or near each other at least, so you had a mother and a father figure growing up, but could they drop you off and not fight with each other, or was it something that you were always in conflict with?
I guess it was like they were sort of, I don't know. I don't know. Where are you going with this?
I don't know, man.
You want me to get into that detailed shit?
Yeah, I mean, to figure out what your life and times was growing up. I mean, if you were stuck in a house when you were young and all you did was hear your parents fight when they would come over and see each other, and you went and hid in a room and just practiced voices, then I could figure out why you figured out creating voices and making people entertained. I'm just curious to if your growing up life, if your parents got along pretty much, even though they weren't together.
No, they didn't get along. But I have a sister, so basically she and I would just ping pong back and forth between the houses. And like we would be with my dad on the weekends and my mom during the week. So she and I were pretty much on her own, which means she basically was like another mother for me. But I'll tell you a funny one about when I first started doing voices. So my sister, when we were like, I don't know, my voice dropped when I was like 12 or 13.
Whoa.
So like I could do like really deep voices already. Plus I started practicing them when I was like 12 or 13. I really like to mimic things and try to figure out how to sound like whatever I saw on TV or whatever I heard on the radio. And there was these commercials at the time that were this guy who, I don't remember if it was like a Geico commercial or something, but it was like the dude who does the movie trailer voice. I'm sure you remember him, but they had him come in to make stories sound more exciting. And the woman says, yeah, our basement was like all flooded. And the guy goes, her basement was completely underwater.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Do you remember those?
Yeah.
And so when I was like 12 or 13 is when those came out. And my sister had the date with this kid. She's basically like 2 years older than me. So she's like 15. And so she can't really go on a date by herself.
Right.
So you had to have like a parent go with you and like sit in the back of the theater or something, you know, like on to the movies. But because my parents were divorced, so my mom had to go on the date with my sister, but she couldn't leave me alone. So I had to go on a fucking date with them too. So it was me tagging along with my mom, and I started doing that voice. My sister must have fucking hated it. So like we get to the movie theater and he's like, do you want some popcorn? He asks if she'd like some popcorn.
It's so good.
Yeah, and they made the mistake of laughing one time when I did it, and then I was like, oh, I'm fucking off to the races now. So I did that like the whole time, just anything I could think of. And I wasn't really like the start of it, but that's the kind of shit that I used to do all the time. And like practice voices and repeat like movie lines and shit like that.
How about prank calls? Were you really into pranking people, and did you ever get in trouble for that?
Well, that sounds more like your realm. I don't like making people feel shitty, so I don't like prank call stuff. I would sometimes do a different voice, but it was never to like make people feel like uncomfortable. Do you ever hear like Chris O'Connell's stuff that he used to do?
I haven't heard the stuff that he used to do, but you might as well shed some light on it.
Dude, he had these crank call things that they're really good. But I don't know, it's like for me, like if I watch like Borat stuff and it's like making fun of other people, if you're not like the butt of the joke, then I have a hard time with it. But O'Connell's so fucking good. It's so funny. He recorded all these things like so long ago. It wasn't for anything. It was just for him. I think he got sick of these telemarketers calling. There was like one with local newspaper publication, and he's like, well, how much is this and that and that? He keeps them on the phone for like 20 minutes. It's fucking impressive.
Just annoying the shit out of them, but being serious.
Yeah, like, annoying the shit out of them. But then as soon as they're like, okay, sir, what you have? He's like, no, don't hang up. I want to buy the magazine. And they're like, it just keeps going.
All right, we're going to get back to you.
Okay.
Thinking about your childhood as well, or just thinking about where you grew up, I think your town is Canterbury, New Hampshire. And is that pretty much growing up in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, my mom moved there because I got a stepfather. And then my dad followed and moved to the same town, to Canterbury. But I don't know, it's probably like 2,000 or less people when I was living there in the whole town. So it is kind of middle of nowhere, but it's also like New England's way different than like out west. It's probably like a 20 to 25 minute drive north of Concord, not even. So it's like not really that far from like an actual city, but we'd never go to anything.
Did it just look like farmland all around you and woods and stuff like that? And are you just playing G.I. Joe shit?
Just only woods. Yo, yeah. My neighbor and I used to go into the woods and play like Star Wars because that was when I first discovered Star Wars. And I would have, like, in the wintertime, I would build jumps. Like, I wanted to be a stuntman. So, like, before I discovered skiing. So I would build, like, all these different things in the snow and jump all around, and then jumping out of trees and biking and building jumps and fucking, like, if you drop me in the middle of that town, like in the middle of the woods, you could be like 5 miles from my house, and I could just look around a little bit and I'd probably be able to get home.
And so with your stuntman stuff, I also read that you had like one rule growing up where you weren't allowed to jump on trampolines. Where did that come from?
Yeah, my dad didn't like them. It was pretty much the only rule, because I mean, I did well in school and I didn't fuck around with other shit. I just was really active all the time. ADHD motherfucker. And then my dad, he just really thought they were super dangerous, which pretty much they are.
Yeah.
But his one rule was no jumping on trampolines. I think because he lived in Plymouth for a while, up north more. The neighbors had a trampoline, and like, I think he was just there one day, and one of the kids like flew off, and they were all around the trampoline, standing there to like guard to make sure that she didn't fly off, and she did, like over their heads, and like people standing around it didn't do any good, and she just broke her arm.
Okay.
And he was like, fuck this shit. And so he was like, this was his one rule, no trampolines. But that's the one rule that I broke.
Did you ever get in trouble for that? Like, I saw you jumping on a trampoline. You can't go out tonight.
No, I mean, there was no social media or anything, so it's not like he could like figure it out unless I broke my arm and he'd be like, how'd you do that? But my friend Brett had a trampoline at his house in Belmont, because I had to go to high school the next town over. So Brett and I were on the cross country team, or I think this would be a soccer team. But when I first discovered skiing stuff, he was already into it. I was like 13 or 14. I guess it would be 14, maybe 15 actually. 13 is when I first like actually got on a pair of skis. And then we would have soccer practice, and then they'd be like, okay, you got to go for this mile-long run. And we'd run directly to his house, jump on the trampoline, and watch like the MSP and fucking Poor Boys movies. It was really what I liked a lot. And we'd watch a little bit of like Candide, and then go and try to learn it on the trampoline. And then come back and like rewind it and watch it again. And we like learned how to do all of like the moves of anything we could find on the ski tapes. And then we'd do that for like however long we thought a mile was, and then and run straight back to the school.
The crazy thing for you is that most people that make it onto this podcast, which is, you know, a ski and snowboard and kind of action sports type podcast, they start skiing at a young age and they develop. You didn't start until you're 13 years old, like you said. I think it's a school program, and you end up going to Gunstock, which is 20, 30 minutes away from your house. Do your mom and dad ski at all, or is this something that you make happen because you want to go skiing?
Well, my mom skied before I was born. My dad did kind of, but not really.
Bless you.
Yeah, that felt good. So when they had this program at the school, she was like, you can do whatever you want. So I started snowboarding and skiing. But then my feet turned in a lot when I was younger. I don't know what you call that.
Pigeon-toed, kind of?
Yeah, pigeon-toed. Is it pigeon or ding-toed or whatever the fuck you got? It's not like duck, which is out, right?
Yeah, duck would be out, pigeon would be in, I think.
Whatever, my feet turned in. So it kind of hurt my knees to snowboard. So I switched over to skiing. Plus, like, the snowboarders at the time, they were like really big. It was a popular thing to do. And like, I could have my snowboard on and I could ride with like my ski friends. But if I had my skis on, my snowboard friends would be like, and like calling you names and shit for it. And I'm like, what the fuck is the difference here? Like, I'm the same fucking person. Like, what's the difference between if I have a snowboard or skis on my feet? So I didn't really like I don't know what you'd call it, like the elitism of it, or like the attitude that came with it. That was just the beginning. I mean, later I'm like skiing with fucking Travis Rice and at the top of things, skiing with all kinds of snowboarders. We're all just like doing the same shit, and then the snowboard stuff goes to the snowboard side and the ski stuff goes to the other side. So at that low level though, I was like, fuck this, I'm just going to ski. And then Brett, who had the trampoline, he went to summer camp up in Whistler. He went to High North Ski Camp when we were 16. So that was like my third year skiing. And then he came back from summer camp and he was like, holy fuck, dude, you have to go. It's like really dope. So I saved all my money up. I worked at an apple orchard down the street from my house. So I saved all my money up and got a ticket to go to Whistler. And then after that, it was all downhill. in a good way, I guess.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Whistler a little bit. So that place isn't cheap. You said you worked at an apple orchard, and that's where you're able to raise your funds. But in thinking about it, did your family have money when you were growing up, and would they have helped you pay for it, or did they split it with you, or was it like if you wanted to do it, it was all on you?
That was all on me. In fact, like the gun stock thing, I think it was like $20 a week to ski. And then when I started getting more into it, when I was like 15, 14, my dad and I split a pair of skis. So I paid for half, and then I got a ski pass the next year because they had night skiing there. So that's how I was able to get better faster, because I could go after school. And like I said, my grades were fine and better than me doing other random shit, I think my parents thought. So we split a pass 3 ways between all of us, which was like $200, not each. It was like $200 for a season's pass there. So no, they didn't have any money. So I raised it all working at the apple orchard. I worked with my dad, who was a woodworker, and that was pretty much it.
And the funny thing about your trip, or at least that first season that you go, is that you hadn't been anywhere outside of New England to do anything yet. So you don't know shit about traveling. And can you describe how your lack of travel awareness helped forge a special relationship with Shane Szocs?
Well, yeah, it actually kind of was the start of my ski career, because I think my dad brought us up to Quebec for Winter Carnival when I was like 10. So it's the only other time I'd been out of the country, never mind out of like New England. I'd never been anywhere. And so I had to fly to Ontario. So anyway, fly there, and then you have to like go through customs, and I didn't know you had to like re-pick up your checked bag. So I had my ski bag in there, but I only had like Solomon Extendos, like old ass race skis.
They're like a carving ski.
Yeah, but they were slightly turned up in the back. That's why I picked them out, because I bought like these used skis at the ski sale, which again I split with my parents. But I kind of picked those because they were slightly turned up in the back, and I wanted to learn how to do 540s. So I learned how to do them on those, which I definitely did a lot of like backwards tomahawking, trying to learn how to fucking keep my tails up. Anyway, I didn't know you had to like recheck your shit when you went through. And so when I got to Whistler, my bag wasn't there. I had nothing, like no ski stuff, nothing. And so Shane, the director of the camp, was like, all right, let's see, we've got to find you some stuff to use. And he had some boots. Oh, crap. What was the name of that Japanese company?
I can't think of it off the top of my head.
He was sponsored by them at the time, so he gave me a pair of boots that were definitely too big for me. And then I borrowed some skis, I think from Mike Atkinson. And then I got some clothes from Chris Turpin. So I immediately I looked like one of them, but smaller, skiing around on the on the glacier up there. And it immediately kind of like put me in the, I wouldn't say spotlight, but they knew who I was. And so I remember seeing Turpin and Pep, and like the racers, when they go up there, they like salt the shit out of like the middle lane, and then they'd race all morning, and then they'd be gone by whenever the sun actually started hitting the snow. So it's just this crazy chunder. And I remember standing on the glacier, I picture myself looking like with my head cocked and like my eyebrows down, like trying to figure out what they're doing. And Pep and Turpin were doing hot laps on the race lane, and they were racing backwards down. And I was like, holy shit. They were just like straight lining through all this chunder and just going so fast. And I was like, I am thinking about this thing in the way wrong way. Like, it made me realize you can be creative in however you want to do shit. It's just playing, and it's just doing whatever you want to do. And so I learned like 5 or 6 new tricks that first year. I think I even learned, I like tried a cork 9 and I landed it and then ran into the wall. But like did a cork 9 and learned how to do, like, I had already done backflips. I was doing those all over the place. But then like flat spin 5s and like, yeah, I just learned a whole shitload of tricks.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I want you to buy all of your ski and snowboard gear from Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Why Peter Glenn? Well, first and foremost, they're the little guy who's been getting people out on snow for over 65 years. They aren't trying to take over an industry by making a ton of branded products that compete with the brands they already sell. They're not trying to get you to stay at a hotel or sell you a vacation. Peter Glenn is about making sure you purchase the right products to ensure that you're going to have the most fun on the hill. And they have all the brands, all the products, and incredible deals both in-store and online. While other retailers focus on algorithms and AI, Peter Glenn is all about having the most knowledgeable staff that understands what you need. And if you've been following him on Instagram, They've been dropping some incredible pro tips that will make your time on the hill more enjoyable. At the end of the day, people have trusted Peter Glenn since 1958 because of their proven track record and all-around passion for snow and beyond. So if you ski, snowboard, inline skate, wakeboard, water ski, or need outerwear for your adventure, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports is your one-stop shop, and they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a hassle-free return policy, and they price-match reputable dealers. So please support this podcast and buy your stuff over at peterglenn.com. Next up, it's Elan Skis. I started telling you about Elan building a cult following in the States about 3 years ago. And if you're like me and heading up to the mountain on a weekly basis, I know you've been seeing more Elans. There's a reason for that. People who ski Elans notice that skiing on award-winning products made in what is considered the best factory in the world will make them a better skier. The product they put into the marketplace is second to none. I mean, Elan's a company that also makes luxury yachts, and they don't cut corners on materials or production. The difference in quality is noticeable. Walk up to any ski wall and compare the craftsmanship of an Elan ski to everything else on the wall. You'll see a difference in the fit and finish, but the most important difference is how they'll perform on snow. That's why Elan's been winning a ton of awards at the magazine tests, because they really do ski better. If you want to have more fun on the mountain this season, get on an Elan. You can find out about all things Elan over at elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, and if you haven't been hearing a lot about Stanley lately, you must be living under a rock. They've absolutely blown up in 2023, and everyone is talking about them. I've been telling you about how incredible their products are at keeping your drinks hotter and colder than anyone else's for about 7 years now. I mean, they invented the category in 1913, and while they always have done well, the world now knows that if you don't have a Stanley, you don't have the best. And I love having the best. Personally, I use Stanley pint glasses every single day, and I swear by them. And my wife and so many others can't live without their Stanley quenchers. And recently, I've integrated Stanley food storage devices into my ski routine. Instead of buying $20 burgers, we bring our food to the mountain, and it stays piping hot in our Stanleys. And I end up saving about $70 a weekend not buying food. While that's rad, what's even radder is that Stanley offers Powell Movement listeners their biggest discount that they make available to the public. I'm going to save you 30% on all your Stanley products. Here's what you need to do to get that discount. Head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and at checkout, enter the code SNOW30. That's all caps and the number 30 with no spaces, and you'll save that 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. So that first summer, you find a whole tribe of people that are like you, and then you go back to New England and you're frothing for winter, and I'm sure you're just working on all the tricks that you had learned at summer camp on trampolines leading up to it. But the biggest contest win that you have that next season when you're in New England is there's the K2 Kahlua Halfpipe Jam. Is this where you develop an early man crush on the type of pro skier that Mike Atkinson was? And can you describe that?
Yeah, he was the first pro skier that I'd really seen leave the West Coast to come to New England. And so he was the announcer. I think Rory Will was there too.
Yep.
But it was like the first time seeing them in the half pipes. There was no half pipe in Whistler. And so Atkinson just coming through, and I think he was just doing straight airs in like 540s, and he was boosting like 8 feet out of the pipe. And I was like shocked. And like he wasn't competing. He was just there as like the pro. And then he got on the microphone and he was super funny. And I was like, oh, it's like not just entertainment on skis. Like you can be a personality and be part of the community in both ways, which I definitely told that to Mike years later, and he was a little offended by it because I think he thought I was trying to say he wasn't as good at skiing. I like struggled to tell him like, no, it was that you could do both.
So you're impressed that he's got another talent other than just skiing.
Right. That he was an entertainer and he was a comedian, and then he was also really fucking good.
So you're building your confidence with those East Coast contests, and then when it's time to go to camp again, you can't make it financially. What do you do?
So that year, Shane, I think, emailed me and said, are you coming to camp? I think because he saw that I could progress fast. Not that I was good, but that I had something. And I said, well, I don't have enough money. And he said, well, just get the plane ticket and we'll work something out. You know, you can come to camp. And I was like shocked. And so I went to camp for like a week. And then Shane at the end of the week was like, do you want to be a digger? You know, building the jumps and stuff. And I was like, yeah. So I called my parents and I was like, they want me to stay on, I guess, to kind of like pay for the session of camp that I went to. So I stayed on for the rest of the summer as a digger, which was really the start of that. And then Shane linked me with that same boot company. So I got like flow stuff from them. And then I got some goggles and stuff from Smith. And then, I don't know, I think it was that summer, or maybe it was the next summer when I got on K2, because Mike Goot was up there, and Shane was like, you got to see this kid ski. And I skied with Goot, and I skied with Nick Mircon. And so me and Nick and Goot were up there, and they're just naming tricks. They're like, can you do this? And I was like, I think so. And I just try a trick, and then they'd be like, can you do it to the right? And I'd be like, woof, I could try it. And I like landed that. And then Mircon's like, can you do a switch flare? And I was like, I guess, or something like that. And then I did it, and he goes, that wasn't really it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm like, you do it.
Does that couple runs with Goot and Mircon, does that earn you a pair of K2 skis?
Yeah, it did. He gave me some skis to use for the next season. And then that next season, I guess when I was 18, is when I started doing more comps back in New England. And I couldn't figure out, I would go up to Waterville Valley or Gunstock, sometimes Loon, but I had a pass to Waterville that I, again, worked up and bought. By then, I got a little bit of local attention from like the other skiers, because I had semi-sponsors and stuff, like local pro-ish thing. If there's a sponsored kid at your mountain, it's like, whoa.
Yep.
But I couldn't do I was trying to learn how to do switch 540s. I could do switch 360s fine, but I couldn't do a switch 5. And I couldn't figure it out. I kept catching my tips, and I kept getting super squirrely. And so I don't know if it was the Kahlua one, but Atkinson came back again at Waterville. They had a competition, and there's a jump there. And I was just like, fuck, I'm just going to do a switch 7 as best I can. So I took off on my inside edges and just threw myself towards the landing instead of trying to stay on my outside edges. And I just flipped towards the landing and did a switch Misty 7. And then I just kind of rode that for the rest of the competitions, and I won pretty much all of them, because no one was really doing that. It was basically just switch Misty 7, and I grabbed mute and bone it out as far as I could.
So summer camp lays the foundation for you, then you come back and you start doing well in contests, and you're getting known on the East Coast. You graduate high school, you go all the way to Plymouth State University, which is 30 minutes from your house.
All the way up there.
Yeah, and it's closer to Waterville and Loon, and that's where you're skiing in college. Are these the hitchhiking days that you're skiing?
Yeah, it was more often that I would get a ride with someone else who was going to the mountain, but I skied every day because I scheduled my classes so that I had class from 8 to 10, and then I'd get to the mountain, whether it was raining or snowing or however I could, and then would ski all day. There was actually a couple of times at Waterville, twice I remember, where I was the only one on the mountain, and the second time the guy at the lift was like, it was pouring rain, and I had a trash bag on, and I was just trying. So I remember I was working on a trick I needed to try to get, but they had the palm lift closed, so I had to go all the way up the mountain. And I've skied every single trail, including the glades and the woods and all that stuff. I've skied the entire mountain backwards, because when I would get kind of bored or over a trick I was trying to learn, I would just go everywhere else. I made it a goal, a kind of a silly little goal, to ski every single one backwards. So I've skied the entire mountain backwards. But the dude at the lift was like, are you done yet? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you're the only one here. If you stop, then I'm leaving. I was sorry, dude, I'm not quite done yet. He's like, fuck.
Was this also the death metal all black Colby era?
Yeah. So I started getting into more hardcore music when I was 15. I really liked punk a lot. And then I just kept going heavier and heavier and heavier with it till I was listening to really hard stuff like Hatebreed and Sepultura and some really hardcore bands. And I wore all black all the time when I was on my skis. They called me the Angel of Death.
And while you weren't a part of the Waterville freestyle team, how were you able to travel with those guys?
Well, I was friends with a bunch of them. They were younger than me. It was Nick Martini and his brother, and Mike Clark and Alex Balson and Hathaway. He was a buddy of mine. I love that guy. So I would ski with them because they were the only other ones in the mountain that were doing freestyle stuff. But they were all part of the academy there. And then Gaza, Jeremy Gazowski, was the coach, and I think he liked me quite a bit. And so I would travel, he was like, you can sleep on the floor if you want to come to this thing. And so, or to a competition or whatever. And so I would go with them to the competition sometimes, or if I didn't have a place to stay, he would hook it up, which I don't know how much animosity came from that, from the other people on the team, because I was not on the team, but I'd go there and most of the time I'd win or do pretty well. But I didn't have any social cues about that. I was just like on a mission, you know?
Yeah, you were just taking advantage of the situation and that dude was cool to you. And
Yeah.
the next major move for you is dropping out of school. Is the thought process kind of like, I have this big opportunity with the ski thing and I want to give it a chance instead of digging way deeper in college debt?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was splitting college again 3 ways with my parents, and I had taken a semester off to start, and I was just worked at Panera. And then when I first went to school, like I said, I scheduled my classes for the morning. And then when I get done with skiing, I'd do all my homework. I like barely showered, didn't really have any friends other than ski friends. And I just went to class and then skied all day. And then at the end of my first year, I said to my mom and my dad, I was like, I think I could be a pro skier. And which is kind of crazy. I've only realized it sort of recently that it's not as common to have your parents be that ridiculously supportive. But as individuals, because they're divorced, I went to my mom and I was like, I think I could be a pro skier. It's just like really expensive. She's like, well, if you think you can be a skier, like you can always go back to college. Like you absolutely should try it. And I was like, okay. And I went to my dad and I was like, I think I could be a pro skier. And he was like, I'll sell you the car for $500 if you want. And you can go try and do it. Yeah. So that's pretty much what happened. I just quit.
So you sell your 6 possessions, you buy this 1990s Saab, and the plan's like you're going to chase ski contests, dirtbag it, and see if you can make the dream happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had that connection with Smith and with K2. So I hit up Goot and then I hit up, what's his name? The other one at Smith. Gabe. Yeah. Hit up Gabe, and they were going to like X Games and the US Open and going to all these things. So I like got into the US Open. I was able to like tag along and sleep on couches and do whatever. And I had my friends from Being a Digger, which was the Lennox, and also Jess Reedy, I guess she'd be now. Jess Cummings. She was like an older sister to me, kind of like everywhere we go. I remember going to Aspen one time and I was like, fuck, I don't know where I'm going to sleep. And I got an old flippy phone at the time. And I got a call from Jess and she was like, where are you staying? And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, got extra room for you. And I was like, thank you. So she just kind of like had me on the radar of like wanting to help. And then I would stay with the Lennox sometimes. And yeah, I just like toured around, and I didn't like crush it or anything my first year. I was in the US Open. I made it to like the semifinals, but not the finals, I think. And that was just my year of like learning the lay of the land. Like I'd never seen shit like that.
How many nights that first year do you think you slept in your car?
I don't know. Probably quite a few. Like because I would sleep in my car like when I was on my way to events. It's hard to remember.
I mean, because that's when I met you, was when you were traveling around and you were staying in your car. And when you would come to Seattle, you would stay with Shmeez and I. And it was like you had a home in Seattle. I think it was one of the safe places where you knew you always had a couch to stay. But can you describe what the most random couch staying experience was that you had?
Well, I thought of like the X Games because I wasn't in the X Games, but I went there anyway. And I can't remember that kid's name.
Rory Silva?
Well, yeah, that was pretty fucking funny because he had this huge boil on his neck. That dude is he's crazy, but he had this huge boil on his neck and he was wearing a scarf the whole time. And I think Shmeez was like, why are you wearing that scarf? Like, what are you doing? He's like, I got this fucking thing on my neck, and like had this huge like welt that was like totally infected. And we're like, what the fuck is that, dude? He's like, I don't know. I tried to like get it out with like a steak knife. And we were like, you gotta go to the fucking hospital, dude. Like he goes to the hospital and just had this massive boil or whatever the fuck it was. That was pretty gross. And I was sleeping on the couch, and like every morning Rory would wake up and just start rolling dudes, like basically sitting on the edge of the couch with me like laying there. He'd be like, yeah, that was my introduction to California skiers.
And then your other X Games experience, the other name you couldn't remember, has it popped in your head yet?
No, it was the same one, but I can't remember what his name was. But he was out partying super late, and he like came back. I was like dead asleep, and he couldn't get into the fucking place. That's the only one I remember.
All right. Well, the thing about you was that you were showing promise and you had a plan. And for your second year, you put that plan to paper, and you're going to show K2 and you're going to show Smith exactly what your 2004 or whatever year is going to be. And you go to K2, you're asking for like $500 to make that happen. And when K2 says no to you, is that a total slap in your face?
Felt like it because, I mean, I didn't really know much at the time, but it didn't feel like very much money to me. And I had shown on paper that I'd spent about $5 or $6 grand. It must have been, because to get around would have been impossible. But anyway, I hadn't spent very much, and I wasn't asking for them to like pay me an exorbitant amount of money. So I was kind of like, well, I just need enough for like gas. That's all I need. And they were like, well, we'll give you $500. And I was okay with that. But then it was like the next year where I was a little bit more butthurt about it, because I was like, okay, well, this is working. I've won all these competitions and I'm going to this thing and I'm going to be shooting with level 1, because I had gotten my way into a photo shoot at Keystone that last year when I was 18. No, wait, how old was I? 19. So I snuck my way into a thing and I ended up being in the level 1 movie. And so I was like, well, this doesn't really make sense that you wouldn't be able to like, not that they wouldn't be able to pay, like again, I don't know anything about budgets or anything, but it was like, well, I kind of have already proved myself a little bit and I'm going to keep going. Like, I'm not going to stop. Like, I really want to get into X Games and I want to do this and I'm going to shoot with level 1 again. So like, I definitely need some funds to be able to do this. And basically Goot was like, no, and kind of didn't really seem to give a shit. So I didn't really know what to do. And Shane actually called Goot and tried to convince him to give me some money because I was going to be busting out the next year and he could see it. But it didn't really work. And then Volkl came along and they were like, we'll give you $5,000. And I was like, this is like no contest. Like, if I stay with K2, essentially I can't be a pro skier. There's no way I'd be able to get out and do all this stuff. I don't even know where my income would come from. But $5,000, that's basically like what it cost me the entire year last year. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that.
You had so many friends at K2. I know, between Schmeez, me, Goot. I mean, you knew every single person that worked at the company, it seemed like, within the ski side, and you would stay with them and have dinner and meals with them. Did that make it harder to leave K2 because you had these personal connections, or was it just like, fuck it, I'm gone for the money?
Well, the only thing that made it difficult was that there was a lot of guilt pushed on me about it. So like, not by the other like skiers or anything, but it was like kind of like an elitist is what it felt like, where everybody was like, just going to go where the fucking money is and you do whatever. And I was like, well, I don't have any options here. So kind of like a lesson in like, maybe this isn't really as family as I thought it was, because it doesn't seem like supportive and good. I mean, if you're going to tell me that you think that I'm good at this shit, but not be able to help or do whatever, then I don't know what to do. But that was when the silencer came out.
Yep.
For K2, and I was so bummed because literally all I wear is black. This is my fucking ski, and that made it really hard to leave because I really liked the skis, and obviously I really liked the company, and it was like the coolest company at the time. And so then I went to Volkl, and they actually made the Volkl wall at the time, which was a symmetrical ski. And all my pro models after that I based off of the Volkl wall and the Tina Star Troublemaker.
When you get on Volkl, the big thing for you is trying to get yourself in the X Games. And are you the kid emailing and asking anyone and everyone who can help you to get yourself in there, like trying to make it happen for yourself?
No, not really. I didn't know how you got into it, but I thought if I could do well at as many competitions as possible, and I didn't really know there was like a panel of people that helped decide. And Shane happened to be on the panel, so it was more like Shane did the advocating for me, and then they put me in as a third alternate, and I was fucking stoked.
Yeah, how do you find out? Like, does Shane call you up and be like, dude, you're in, third alternate?
Yeah, pretty much. I think it was an email. But yeah, he basically was like, yeah, you're in for third alternate. And I was not disappointed by any, like, it wasn't like I was like, oh, I want to be in it. I was just like, oh, fuck, okay.
I'm going to Aspen.
Yeah, I'm going to Aspen. Now I got to make sure I'm fucking good enough to do this shit. And so when I went to Aspen, I think one person got hurt. It was when the slopestyle was on the other side of the half pipe. And in practice, I learned how to do a switch 10. And it was actually Jossi's first year as well, because he and I had like become friends in the last year, like traveling around. And he and his brother were there, and Jossi was in the half pipe, and I was in slopestyle. And Jossi like shattered the shit out of his collarbone. And so I just remember him at the bottom of my slopestyle run, like in his sling, and he and his brother's like holding up a sign with my name on it. It was pretty funny. But anyway, I learned how to do a switch 10 in the practice things. And then like 2 people dropped out because they got hurt. And then Jakob, it was like his first year of being pretty over competitions and shit, even though he was like one of the best.
Right.
This course is stupid, can't get speed. Like, I don't want to do it. I just want to go ski in the backcountry. And I was like, well, if you don't do it, then I get to do it. And he was like, yeah, you do it. I'm not doing it. And I was like, fucking for reals? He was like, yeah. And so he dropped out and I got in, and then I got third.
I mean, it's got to be one of the best days of your life. And when you think about it, are there nerves, and can you take us through the personal highlights of that day?
Yeah, if I can remember it. I mean, those things tend to get blacked out. But, I mean, I was on the podium with fucking Candide.
That's so crazy.
Which was really funny because this dude who I literally watched videos 3 or 4 years earlier, I was watching videos of him learning how to, like, be cat in the air just because, like, on the trampoline and shit. And, yeah, that was pretty crazy. I didn't talk to him the whole time. I was just, like, starstruck. But, yeah, I remember I'm not very tall. I'm like 5'7", but I'm like really dense. Like I weigh a lot. And so I think that's why I was able to like do well in the contest because like not a lot of people could get speed. So I just picked all the features that would make you go faster for the bottom jumps. So that I remember. And then my cousin lived in Aspen. And so I think we all went out to like dinner afterward or something. Yeah, I just remember having this medal in my hand. And that's what I remember is like having the medal in my hand and then sitting in my car where I had been essentially living.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and I can't tell you how much I love my gear from Outdoor Research. When I signed on with OR, I knew there wasn't an outerwear brand on the market that performs as well as what OR is developing. That's what happens when you test your gear in the absolutely terrible conditions that we can get here in the Pacific Northwest. Days in the mountains are always more fun when you're warm and dry, and I know my OR gear will always deliver that. I'll tell you, on cold days, I live in my cold front hoodie, which is hands down the warmest and most stylish puffy I've ever owned. And then when I get on snow, my snow crew jacket and pants are not only warm, but it's one of those fits where if you don't see me ski, I look like a pro. I'm so impressed with the style that OR has been bringing to the table lately. And off snow, they sent me some Feroci pants, which are now my daily drivers. Think stylish, lightweight, packable, do-anything pants with the right amount of zippered pockets and stretch to be the only pant that you'll ever need. I love them. And really, I've been loving OR products since I bought my first OR rain jacket in 2000. And I'm going to save you 25% on your OR gear. Here's what you need to do. Head on over to outdoorresearch.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the code SNOW25 and you'll get the deal. That's all caps, no spaces, and the number 25. My final sponsor this round is Best Day Brewing. If you haven't heard of Best Day, they are hands down the best tasting non-alcoholic beer on the market. I enjoy Best Day for so many reasons. The flavor is the most important. I swear by the hazy IPA, the Kolsch, and the Belgian White. They all taste just as good or better than their alcoholic cousins. And I'll tell you, while I haven't quit drinking, when I go to the bar, after 3 or 4 beers, I usually feel like it's time for me to head home, and everyone thinks I'm lame. But lately, I have a new routine. I'll have a Best Day every 3rd beer, and it makes my night last twice as long. And we all know lasting longer is better. If you want to have your best day or night ever, or just enjoy a few cold ones at Après, grab a Best Day, and you can forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, and forget about getting in trouble on the way home. To see all the flavors and order some beer, head on over to bestday.com. And if you're flying Alaska, you can now get a Best Day Kolsch at 30,000 feet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. Do you get emotional at all when you're sitting in your car and you look at the medal and you realize that all this hard work and everything that you've put into it actually worked out, and now you're in the car that you live in with the medal?
No, I think that the more emotional part of it would be the money part because it was 10 grand and that just was relief. I'd never felt that before. I'd never had $10,000 in my fucking life. And like just to have that all of a sudden was like a wave of relief. I remember the next couple of days, I just felt like I could do anything. I was like, I'm no longer limited by this thing that's limited me my entire life. Even though it's only 10 grand, it's like, fuck, I can eat a real meal. Like I was eating like ramen and fucking canned soup and shit. And so I think that was the reward for my efforts. And the efforts weren't to get money. I didn't even think of that. I didn't even think that that was going to be a piece that would impact me. But it was like, oh shit, okay, this is like a real legit thing.
And then things start taking off for you. And this is a time when you and a few other skiers skied slope, pipe, and big air. But were you almost one of the last skiers from the non-specialized generation?
Yeah, I think the last one from that would have been like Gus.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Jossi did it for a long time as well. But yeah, it was like I was filming with Matchstick and doing half pipe comps and big air and slopestyle like all in the same time. I think that's when Jossi and I started getting a lot closer too because we were just everywhere together.
The next year, you take 3rd at X in pipe, you take 4th at X in slope. But this means that in the height of the Simon Tanner battle, you were on the podium with those dudes. Was that one of the cooler or one of the only rivalries that you ever saw firsthand in your ski career?
Yeah, and it wasn't even really a real rivalry. I think a lot of it was just for like TV show. They wanted something to build it up because, yeah, they weren't like homies, but they weren't angry at each other. Like they just were two people that had the same type of personality of like, I want to be number one and I want to win. So they were just focused in their own lanes, but they kind of made it because they were both so good. They kind of morphed it into a battle on TV pretty much. I ended up living with Simon for a couple of years after that. He's like a really, really close friend of mine, but like neither one of them is known for having the most approachable personality.
That's a good way to say that.
Yeah. And I kind of saw that from a distance with Simon, but then once you get to know him, it's just because he's just making jokes and Simon's just being Simon. And it's the same thing with Tanner. You could say, Tanner just gonna Tanner.
So you're competing against these guys, and that second X Games year, you also won the U.S. Open Big Air, and you win the 48 straight halfpipe contest. In 48 straight, you beat Simon, and do wins where you beat the Do Monster, is that even more important than winning bronze at X?
No, I didn't really care about that too much. I just was doing what I could do. So again, we talked about those two guys having their like, just gonna do their thing. I guess I was not on the same scale or level, but I was the same way. I was like, what can I possibly do? I didn't have it in my mind that it was anybody else out there. I just would try to work on what I thought would be a run that could win. And so that's pretty much all I did. It didn't make it any different. It just, at that time too, just ping-ponging all over the place to all these different contests. And like the US Open was a surprise win because it was dumping snow and like a bunch of the dudes didn't show up. So like, yeah, of course I have a better shot at winning that shit. It's not like I planned out those things, but at my first X Games, the run was slow and I have been able to get more speed than everybody. And it's the same for like the US Open. And then like if it was shittier weather or whatever, I seem to do better. And then also I'm not like a all or nothing type of skier. There's so many contests where fucking TJ should have beat the shit out of me in a contest, but he's just going for broke. And so he'd crash. He'd like try something new in a contest and he'd either land it and just absolutely destroy the competition like you've seen him at Big Air in the US Open, or he'd crash,
Yeah. And you're more the play it safe type guy where it's like, I'm just going to do something I can land.
Yeah, that's definitely the way I was. I also got a little of that from Yoon because Yoon was that way too. And actually Tanner was like that as well, except Tanner would work way harder on doing what it was. I remember I saw him try one time to change his run up in finals and he absolutely fucking ate shit. I remember watching and thinking to myself, that was a reminder for him that he doesn't have to do that in order to win. Like for me, I remember I was at the top of the slope style my second year at X Games. No, wait, it must have been my third year. But I qualified first for slope style, so it means you drop last. And so after everybody went, I was in third and I was in fifth. So I went down after my second run and I was in fifth. And I remember when I went to Davey at Monster, he was like, well, what are you going to do? And I was like, well, if I do this double 12 that I've been working on the bottom jump and I land it, then I'll win. And if I just do the run that I've been doing and I do it perfectly, then I'll get third. And he was like, so what are you going to do? And I was like, well, fuck, I'm going to get third. And I guess that's a good summation of the way that I skied when I was in competitions because there wasn't a lot of speed for the last jump. And my confidence of landing the trick were pretty good, but I hadn't done it, didn't do it in practice, I had done it like a week earlier, but I was like, I don't think that makes sense right now because if I don't land it, then I'll get fifth and that's nothing. So I just went up and got third.
All right. Well, that's the mentality of how you compete. And then when you think about when you're not competing, like you mentioned, you were kind of on Team Simon. You lived with Simon for a while and you had a traveling crew of skiers.
There was no rivalry and you go, Team Simon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you live with Simon for a while. I'm going to call it Team Simon. It can be no rivalry. I don't care. But you're on Team Simon through this huge rivalry where they hate each other and they can't even look at each other when they're skiing because it just brings up bad blood. But you're on the Simon team. Simon had this great house in Breckenridge and he had a bunch of people living with him. And then it was like a traveling band of it was like a boy band almost. It was like you, Peter, TJ, Jossi, you guys are all traveling around. And when I first met you, you did not party at all. You were like in your car, you'd come back and sit with Shmeez and I while we would be partying and you would sit there and you wouldn't. When did you go from straight edge kid to being the kid who likes to go out and have some beers?
I think it was at Yoon's event. Yeah, that's my best guess. But it was basically like, like, no, I don't drink. And I'm at Yoon's event. We're sitting in like VIP with like champagne, and Yoon was basically like, I think you can have a drink. I invited you here to Sweden. You're a pro skier now. This is on me. I think it's time for you to have a drink. And I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So you had one drink, and then the rest is history. It seemed like you became a party guy from there on out. And not like in a bad way, where I don't think it really ever impacted your skiing that much. But you were going out. Was it like 3 to 5 nights a week when you were in the prime of your career?
Well, you say 3 to 5 nights a week. Like, that's like normal people shit. Like, I still didn't drink very much. I didn't really need it. But we were just doing rock star shit. I drank a bit. I wouldn't say I drank like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a difference for me anyway. There's like a difference between like partying and drinking. Like, I didn't really need the drinking. It was just part of what we were doing. And yeah, we would just rock star the shit out of it. It was like just a traveling fraternity, and we'd fucking rage everywhere we went.
And so part of the whole thing of the traveling fraternity of professional skiers is that when you win, and I don't think it happens as much anymore, but there was the 10% rule back then. 10% of your earnings go to the bar tab. There was a time when you had to buy $5,000 worth of champagne. You've told me that story before. But in thinking of the 10% rule, what was the most lavish 10% rule you were ever a part of?
I guess the one that I did was like my biggest year. I don't know if you want to hear about that one.
No, you've told me that one again. I mean, I want to hear like the biggest where someone else had to pay and it was more expensive than your 2 bottles of champagne.
I feel like probably Joss Christensen, because he'd always get fucked with that. He was just crushing it. But I don't know.
All right. Well, you don't have to worry about that story. But when you're doing well in contests and you're always making finals and you're always on TV, people are going to know your name. Did you ever feel Ski Town famous, like walking around and just seeing people's heads turn and look at you?
Yeah, sometimes for sure. It was pretty fun. It's a really fun feeling. Like the boys, we show up to a mountain and the local people and everybody there is like, oh my God, that's fucking the boys. And so that was pretty fun. I guess the most interesting one, or like the one that I'm kind of the most proud of getting recognized, was there was a big air event in London, and my dad had still never really traveled. I brought him to X Games one year, but I was like, do you want to come to London with me? And so I brought him there, and I stayed with a friend at this he has this huge mansion there. I was just trying to show my dad like a proper traveling the world time. And we're walking across the London Bridge, and this kid comes up and he goes, "Are you Colby West?" And I was like, yeah. He's like, "Oh man, can I take a picture?" And my dad's like looking at me like, what the fuck is happening right now? He's like, "Can you take a picture for us?" Like, to my dad. My dad's like, "Of course." So they got a picture with this guy. And I think my dad knew that I was doing well and that I was on TV and stuff. But that made me feel really proud because he was able to see how far it had reached.
How about with the ladies? Because I'm sure when you're driving around wearing all black and you're just in your Saab and you're a dirtbag, you're not bringing any girls back to the Saab. But then when you start standing on podiums and you're at X Games and you're on TV and everybody knows who you are, is it like you have more than your fair share of partners when it's all said and done?
Fair share of partners. Yeah. You ever see the movie The Dirt?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say I was a little more on like the lead singer part of that. Not that I was a lead singer of our little band, but I would fuck anything.
Oh, wow. I had no idea about that because when I saw you, you were in a vehicle and no girl would get within 10 feet of you. So everything changed for you. You got Ski Town famous and then it became layups for you?
Yeah, pretty much. And it wasn't because I got any more attractive or it was like people knew who you were or anything. It was just more like confidence is just way up, and that goes a long way.
Oh, to be young, man. Well, one thing that we haven't talked about is filming. And you started, like you said, when you're on K2 with level 1. I don't think K2 is paying your way in there, but you're able to be in that movie. Does your deal with Volkl get you in with MSP?
Yeah, I think it was Volkl that got me. And I had some different sponsors at the time. I can't remember which one was really it. Maybe it was Volkl. I'm not sure. But the way that I got in with MSP is I did a photo shoot. And I think I was with Yoon. We were in Mount Hood, and Yoon kind of dragged me along to this shoot because they wanted to try out this camera rig where you could like do a follow cam, but with like actual film camera.
Okay.
So it was like a 16 millimeter camera. And so Yoon, he wanted to introduce me, but also he had intentions. He wanted to get these 6 shots of like flying through the air. And I was like, I'll fucking do it. So when I got there, that's when I met Murray and all the dudes at MSP, I'm pretty sure. And then I basically filmed a little segment there just at that section. And then they asked me if I wanted to shoot the next year. And so I did.
So, like with a lot of MSP segments, people have to fly all over the world and they have to nail perfect conditions. And there's a lot of things that go into making a really good segment. And that's their backcountry riders. You know, if Seth Morrison's going to put together a segment, it's going to take his whole season. He's going to have to travel to like 15 different places. But for you, for what you're doing, you know, just park shoots. I mean, do you show up to like 2 or 3 park shoots for MSP and then you go back to the hotel and sit in front of the camera and do your impressions and be funny for a little bit? And then they're like, all right, we just got gold with Colby. You're done. Go on with the rest of your season.
Well, the way that it worked was out of the reason I did like one of my first ones, I guess, would be the one where I'm singing It's Not Unusual.
Yep.
It's like the example of how I got kind of, I don't want to say pigeonholed, but I kind of got put in that space of doing funny segments. Is I always felt really, because I like to entertain, I like to make jokes and shit. And it felt awkward to me to just make a ski segment and have it be like, check out my skiing without like other kind of entertainment in there.
Yep.
So it was when the ski tour was happening. There's like the half pipe competition. And then that was my last year that I got a medal at X. And I think I won the US Open.
04, 05-ish?
I'd say 5, 6,
okay,
something like that. But anyway, I was like ping ponging all around. I was filming with matchstick. Like I did a couple backcountry things. First of all, on the backcountry side of things, I shot backcountry with level 1 and it scared the shit out of me. I didn't like that. Didn't know like what the fuck was under the snow.
Right.
Like we'd go to like Montana and it would be like, yeah, that looks sweet. And it just, all I could think of was like a couple of times when you like snag a rock and you're like, fuck. And it didn't really sit well with me. I don't know, maybe that goes along with the personality of being like, I'm just going to get third. Where I was like, I don't know if this is worth it. And I remember being in the middle of the backcountry. We had no cell service for like miles, not even where we were staying. We were in Cook City. And we rolled up into the mountains and this avalanche happened before we got there. But it was like the crown of it was like 15 feet high and the entire valley was just massive chunks. We were like, whoa, that's crazy. And I just had this little moment of like, holy shit, like 10 minutes earlier, we couldn't have outrun with a fucking snowmobile. Like, it was like, oh, we are really out here. And that's when I was like, I don't know if this part's for me, man.
Yeah.
Well, with the matchstick segment. So I was at a contest in Europe. I think I was at the European Open in Laux, I think it was. And it was basically like ping-ponging back and forth. So like I was in X Games and then I went over to Europe for the Euro Open and then flew back for the US Open or something and then flew back over to go film with Matchstick. And I was also doing the ski tour at the time. There was 3 stops for the ski tour. So basically what happened was we were staying on a boat in Monaco on one of Yoon's friends' boats. It's a 7-bedroom yacht. It's just fucking ridiculous.
Sounds like such a nice life.
Dude, it was so crazy. There's a shitload of stories just from that one trip, but this one's basically how I got into doing like the comedy things is like we were building this big old jump up in Lavinia, I think. I don't know where it was, in Italy. But anyway, we go up there every day and we're building this massive jump and the weather was really shitty. And so it was just really like gray and we weren't going to be able to shoot. We just had to wait. And that's like another thing about the backcountry stuff too. Obviously you have to have the right conditions. And so I get an email from Kip Nelson, who was the guy who organized the ski tour. And he was like, hey, Jossi got hurt or something, or Simon got hurt. And he was like, are you going to come to the final event? And I was like, well, I'm in Europe right now. I'm shooting my segment here. So he like called me, I'm pretty sure, and was like, hey, for like the TV and stuff, like I'll fly you here if you can get here because you're like ranked to win this thing. So we kind of want it for the story and I'll fly you to Idaho. And so I was like, well, let me talk to the producer. So I talked to Murray at MSP. I was like, they really want me to go to this competition. And Murray's like, well, man, you know, you had a good season already. You got like your X Games medal and you won the Open. Like, don't you want to like round it out with a really good segment? Because like, if you go, you know, like, I don't think we're going to have enough. Maybe you can share a segment with Jakob or something. And I was like, fuck. And I've been singing that It's Not Unusual song like the whole week that we were there because I pretty much just discovered Tom Jones. And I was like, we're in Monaco. What if I like get me like a fluffy shirt and we just do like a music video and I'll just lip sync to this song? And they're like, that could work. Like we could check the rights. And they came back the next day and was like, yeah, the rights are like $5,000. And I was like, is that a lot? He was like, no, it's not. He was like, yeah, let's do it. So we shot the whole in between parts. And so I didn't have as much skiing in it, but we had stuff from like the Keystone shoot, and we did some shoots other places, and then just did the shoot in Alaska later in the spring. So like I had this segment that was rounded out with a music video. And so I was super proud of that one. That was like my favorite one. So I just kind of wanted to come up with something funny to do for them for my segments from then on.
You had a bunch of good segments, but we're getting to a point in the podcast where we're getting a little long. So I have to ask some questions that I didn't want to ask right away, but I'm going to anyway. So you brought up that Alaska trip. I think this is the one that you showed up a day late to, and you missed the real progression session. That's kind of a bummer, but when you hear about what all the young kids are doing, like they're hitting double cork 16s and triples, is it almost like, holy shit, you can almost see the writing on the wall, like, these are tricks I'm never going to do?
Yeah, I think by that time I wasn't going to learn a lot of those things. I did have one trick that I really wanted to learn, which was before Bobby started doing it, but I wanted to do a switch double Misty because that was like my trick to learn in my mind anyway, because I'd always done switch Misty 7s and I could absolutely see it, which is just double switch Misty 7, and I totally could see how it would go and all that shit. And I wasn't super good at doing like double flips, but I knew that if I could learn that one, then I would be able to win everything because no one could do it and whatever. And then because I was getting older and I had a little more fear about everything, it took me like a whole year to learn how to do it. And within that time, Bobby learned how to do it and he won everything. So I was like, okay. And then I was like, well, I'm going to learn that. So I learned the switch double Misty. I remember I landed it. I was with PK and I landed it and I like immediately put my hands in the air and PK was like, dude, you look like an idiot. Like, stop claiming it. And I was like, I'm not claiming it. I'm just very relieved. And I remember a very big change at that moment. I was like, I'm done. I'm done with these things for now.
So when that happens, when you realize that you're done, that you don't have the tricks that everybody else has because you're getting older and their bones are still rubber, is it scary? Is it frustrating? Is it embarrassing? Or is it just like you're done with skiing and you don't want to ski as much anymore?
Well, it was a little confusing because it was right when the Olympics came around, or they were talking about having the Olympics. But I didn't think the Olympics was going to be a good idea. We didn't really need it. We had X Games and we had all this other stuff. And, I went to the meetings for the Olympic stuff because I was still one of the bigger people. And I went to the meeting and I was the only athlete there. There was a bunch of people that I don't know talking about like going to the Olympics. And I was kind of like, it was just uncomfortable. And I was like, I don't think I need to be part of this because I cared about skiing and about my family and the boys and all that shit more than I cared about. I didn't understand the stars in the eyes about the Olympic stuff. And that's pretty much when I was like, yeah, I don't think I really want to be a part of this anymore.
Well, what's crazy is when you think about sponsor-wise, you were at K2, then you went to Volkl, then you leave Volkl for Corrupt. And that was like a whole story in itself, a whole podcast where they signed like an all-star team. You guys were all given Mini Coopers when you signed on with them. You got pro models. They're treating everyone like Red Bull athletes. And then the money, I think, ran out or it just didn't last anymore. So the next sponsor you end up on is Kastle. And They want an athlete that's more than just a skier. They want a personality, but they also want a dude that's going to make the Olympic team. And they put out a press release when they signed you saying that Colby West is going to be our Olympian. Do they sign you to a long contract? And is all the conversations about making the Olympics? And in your head, do you know you're not going to make the Olympics?
Well, it was like a bittersweet type of thing. Because, I was like, well, if the Olympics are going to happen, then I can certainly try to go and definitely would be sweet to do. So that's what was happening when you see like press conference and those things is I was definitely in my own head like, well, if I'm going to do it, then I have a bunch of shit I need to do because it was going to be half pipe. So I talked with my dad about building a vert ramp back home in New Hampshire because I knew that one of the reasons that Shaun White was so good at half pipe on snowboard was because he was so good on wheels. On a skateboard and a half pipe, you can't use your edges. You have to land completely square, stomped every time. And I saw the difference between him and the other snowboarders. Even like Danny Cass, who was really fucking good, he would still use his edge when he was landing. And then I watched Jossi, who used to skateboard and rollerblade when he was younger, and he does the same thing in the pipe. And it's the same for Tanner. Like they land so squarely that you don't use your edges at all, and they just have so much more control. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to have to do it properly. So we talked about building a vert ramp and like both skateboarding and probably rollerblading would have been even better to learn how to do more tricks and shit. And it was kind of getting obvious that I wasn't going to really work. And what I said actually to my agent, because they were paying me a good grip of money. And as soon as I realized about halfway through that I wasn't going to really work out, because Gus was really coming up big, and I knew he was on Atomic, I think, or he was on Armada, maybe.
Yep.
And so I said to my agent, I was like, hey, if we take a chunk of my money and we get Gus, like I'll give him a piece of my thing, because Gus is going to, if he doesn't win, he's going to get a medal at the Olympics this coming season or whatever it was. And I was like, if we take part of my thing, then Kessler's happy. He'll be skiing on the Colby West Pro model. Like, everybody fucking wins because I'm not going to be able to make it. And my agent was like, bro, you always got to take the money. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a good idea. And then the last year of it was not very fun for me because that's when I knew. I was like, I'm not going to do this. And then I watched Gus go get a medal, and I'm like, fucking, why don't I listen to myself? Could have been like way easier.
So this is pretty much around the end of your ski career. One thing I usually bring up in the podcast is money and how much money you're able to make in your best year. And when you think about it, you came into skiing at a time when there wasn't a shitload of pro skiers, especially in the comp world, and there was a lot of money being thrown around. Were you able to make $200,000-300,000 grand? It's like the height of your ski career?
Yeah, pretty much that's around what I'd say, like 250, something like that.
And you had probably 4 or 5 years of doing that?
Yeah.
So skiing is a cash cow for you, and it is a relief because you don't have to worry about money anymore. But when skiing ends, do you have to call up all your sponsors and let them know that you're done? Or do they call you up and let you know you're done?
No, I talked to them and told them I was, and they were like, yeah, sweet, whatever you want to do. And it was good working with you. And then I called Monster, and I was like, I'm not going to compete anymore. And they were like, well, what do you want to do now? Which was the only sponsor that was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I just want to make fun shit, videos and stuff. And they're like, yeah, we'll keep sponsoring you. So I'm still sponsored by Monster right now.
So you're on like a talent deal with them. And what does that mean? Do they get like 30 days of your year to like send you to events and have you MC stuff?
No, it's just a personality deal. So like I come up with projects and write things for them, and we just finished doing an ad with Dingo for one of their new things coming out. And then I got into the drift world a little bit. So it's a personality deal in the sense that they pay me to wear the logo and promote the shit, which I have no problem with because I love much. Like the amount I've been on them for, this is my 16th year. Like the loyalty is fucking amazing.
You've got Monster, but the ski career is done. Your next move is to Southern California. It makes total sense. I mean, you have so much talent with your voice that it makes sense to go down to Southern California and see if you can make it in the world of Hollywood. But is it tough on the ego when you leave the ski world and you go to Los Angeles and you're really nobody at that point? You're just a regular civilian. Is that hard for you to adjust to?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even say just because of that. Anytime, watch my other friends, all of us coming down out of skiing, like out of being on like the big time level, and it's fucking rough all around. Doesn't matter where you go. It's just really weird to go from being told since you're like 15 years older, even for most of the boys since they're like 10, that you're like a god and you can just keep going and pushing and doing. And then all of a sudden they're like, so now what are you going to do? Go to school? And you're like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah, totally.
The fuck you're talking about. But I'd say I had it better than, because I have some other talents and shit. I had it better than a lot of the boys. But also I just was like really over skiing and all of the politicky stuff and all that shit. I didn't want to ski like at all. So I just stopped. But that kind of leads me to now where I'm ready to start again. Not again, but ready to do it more on the bigger stage.
Does that mean we'll see a Colby West edit in the near future?
Possibly. I'm talking with Warren Miller right now and trying to figure out what to do. But my main thing that I've been working on is I want to make, because my segments in ski movies were all kind of based around music, or I've made My Friend is a Pro rap song about skiing, and like Jossi and I made another one like Ballin' kind of, and It's Not Unusual, and I've had a couple different songs and shit. So what I've been working on now for the last year, like as my big thing in skiing that I'd like to not end on, but like that I'd like to give back a little bit, I guess you could say. I don't know if that sounds pompous or whatever, but I want to make a musical ski movie.
Huh.
Yeah. So it'll be like a comedy, musical, narrative ski movie. So I've been writing the songs for that. I got a song called Après, and I got a song called Proho.
Okay.
So it'll be like a narrative ski movie, kind of like Hot Doggish type thing.
All right, well, that's what we're going to look for in the future, and that's our podcast, but you're not really off the hook yet, because my last segment of the show, which you might not remember because it's been like 8 years since you and I did a Powder podcast, but My last segment of the show is called Inappropriate Questions, and I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. This week, I was able to get another legend from your era and beyond to ask the questions. I'm talking about 6-time X Games medalist and Olympian Jossi Wells. And are you ready for question 1 from Jossi?
Yeah.
Colby, it's your brother from another mother. First inappropriate question. How about you tell the listeners about how you laid a beat down on a kid half your size at the US Open while it was snowing?
There you go.
Okay. So another thing that I started doing is writing down all the stories and things that have happened. I was going to make it into a little book called Stories to Poop To, because they're all like 10-minute reads. So this was one of them, and I actually talked to Jossi about it the other day. When I won the U.S. Open for Big Air, it was like just me and Jossi were in the finals, and he was like pretty little. And my side of the story was like how much fun we had, and it was like skiing with bros, and I was talking to him about it. He goes, "You mean the time I fucking lost the U.S. Open?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." But basically, it was like the two of us, and it's like head to head in the finals, and there was dumping snow. I was starting like a good 200 feet up above the start gate where the lights started, and then Jossi had to hike like another easily. He was like another 400 feet up the hill, and so you could hear the announcer or whatever, but then the judges would be ready, and then Frankie at the top of the drop-in, he was like, "Okay, we're ready for Jossi." And I'd be like, "Okay." And then I'd yell at the hill, and like, "Jossi, they're ready for you." And I just dropping. And then I just see him come out of the dark, put my hand out for a high five on the way down. And it was really fun. But he couldn't get speed, so we were just doing switch 10s, and I happened to be able to actually make it all the way to the landing. So I won.
All right, so that is question number 1. We're going to jump into question number 2.
How about you tell the listeners about when we were in Sweden and you were rapping all the words to a certain hip-hop song, and I was dumbfounded about how you knew it. And then later that evening, you premiered a particular song that you and a friend made, and it all made sense.
Yeah, so that was in Sweden. We were at Yoon's Super Sessions, and we had to make a segment, and that's a real long story about how I got there. I won't tell the long version, but basically Tanner and Sammy were a team USA, and then Tanner was like, "Fuck this is just a Yoon dick sucking fest," and he dropped out, so it was just Sammy. So Yoon was like, "You should go with Sammy." I called Sammy, and Sammy was like, "No, I'm going to go. I'm bringing my friend from my hometown." And I was like, "Hey, cool." And then Yoon calls me a week before the contest is supposed to start. And he's like, "Sammy just dropped out, so you got to find another skier to go with, and you need 2 cinematographers and a photographer." I'm like, "Fuck!" So I crammed the whole thing together, called my friend John Sims, who had basically just retired at the time. And I was like, "Who should I bring?" He was like, "I don't know." And then he called me back later, and he was like, "Bring me." And I was like, "All right, fuck it." So when we got there, I made all the boys sit in the room for the first couple of days of the thing. I was like, we have to do something fun, entertaining. So we're not going to win based on tricks. So let's try to come up with something. And we were listening to this song, Mano and T-Pain, All the Above. And we just started listening to that. And then John started saying, "Well, the only reason I'm here is because I'm friends with a pro." And he started singing, "My friend's a pro," over the Mano and T-Pain song. And so we were like, fuck it, let's just make that. And so we wrote all the lyrics out, and we made My Friend is a Pro. But Jossi, he really liked that song by Mano and T-Pain, and he didn't know that we were working on making a rap. Just basically took the exact track, which was illegal contest rules, but we didn't really give a shit. And so we had memorized the whole song, so we just basically had to rewrite lyrics for the entire thing. So we're on our way to the ceremony where there's 5,000 people or something to go have all the videos premiere. The editor, Mike, was working. Literally, he just didn't go to sleep that night, just editing the whole thing together. And then we get there, and we're all their little tables. And I'll never forget, Jossi was at the table in front of us. And we start the edit of My Friend is a Pro. And because it's the same opening the whole thing's the same as the Mano and T-Pain song. And Jossi just stands up with his arms up "You guys didn't fucking get it." He was "You guys use this song?" We're "Keep watching, dude." Just he was blown away. Because when we showed up at the awards thing, Chris Turbin was judging, and he was like, "Holy shit, guys, that was fucking amazing. We watched it 7 times before we moved on to the next video." And John was like, "So we won?" And Turbin was like, "Well, no, you got dead last." And we're like, "What? How is that possible?" And we got People's Choice Award, which was a bouquet of flowers.
Oh.
And then Yoon changed the rules the next year to make it the most entertaining. Because they had judged it as a big air contest. And I was doing 0 spins and we were just doing random shit. in the video. And then, they just judged it based on the tricks, not on the actual edit. So we lost.
All right, well, let's jump into his final inappropriate question.
Would you explain to us what it feels like to perform your very own rap song on the same exact stage that members from the Wu-Tang Clan performed on, right alongside your best bud? Love you, bro.
Wow, love you too, buddy. I basically wrote another song. Jossi and I wrote it together to shoot at X Games called Ballin' Kind Of. It didn't turn out that great, but it was really fun to shoot because we were just rolling around Aspen during X Games. Jossi was competing in both slope and pipe, and anytime that we could pull him away to film part of it, we just filmed all around town and snaked our way into the ski party. I don't remember what company it was. I guess it was maybe Free Ski or something, but they had like a show. They were doing like a big old party at Belly Up. So we like went to the thrift store and got all this like crazy gear, and we were like, can we play it on the stage? And they were like, sure. And so the dudes at the venue were not stoked because they were like, had to like turn on the whole PA system and all this shit. And it was like, we didn't know the lyrics yet because we had written it like 3 days before. So I was like, we need you to play the actual, because they started playing just the instrumental. And I'm like, we kind of need you to play the whole thing. The guys were like, so you don't even know the song? I'm like, no. And so we get there, and Jossi had just learned that. He was like, man, fucking Wu-Tang played on the stage. And I was like, yeah, and ZZ Top and fucking Led Zeppelin and like every single band in the history, anybody who's ever been to Aspen has played on that stage. So we got to rap on stage to a song that we didn't really know yet.
Well, that seems like it could be embarrassing, but an amazing memory for the ages. And that's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And looking at your life and times, you weren't meant to be a pro skier. You were meant to be where you are now in Hollywood. And while fame takes time, you're destined for it, but you weren't destined to be an X Games athlete. That was all passion, heart, determination, and you made all that happen for yourself. And there's not too many skiers that don't have any family history in the sport that didn't grow up doing it as a family activity or anything that make it to the top level where you lived for years. And that's pretty special. So it's a really cool story. You have a ton of talent. I'm excited to see where you take that, and I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, man. We'll see you this winter.
Yeah, sweet as.
So that was time with Colby West, and I love careers like Colby's. A true rags to ski riches story where a dude comes from nothing. There was no path for Colby. He created it on his own with no one helping him until he met Shane Szocs. And with Shane's guidance, Colby was able to create a great life for himself. And he really was one of my favorites. When I knew him in his K2 days, he not only entertained the shit out of me with his voices, but he was so hungry. You could feel it, and I wish every athlete that I managed had that in them. But that's not always the case. While I won't name names, I've definitely worked with supremely talented people who could have been so much more successful if they weren't lazy, for lack of a better term. But that was never Colby, always going the extra mile and entertaining everyone along the way. I was bummed when he got let go at K2, but that was a blessing in disguise that helped catapult him to finding success on big podiums. So maybe Colby should be thanking K2 for lighting that fire even more. That's the podcast. Now it's time for the review of the week, and it comes from Rachel from Seattle. It's a 5-star review titled The Skiing Podcast I Was Looking For. Here's the review. I'm a new listener and recent transplant to Seattle from Colorado. I'm getting used to the skiing here and have been following Ingrid Backstrom's career for a while. Finding your interview with her helped me feel psyched about skiing out here, and it's great to hear from women in skiing. Love the show and appreciate your honesty. Well, I'm going to have a lot more women in skiing coming on the podcast. I need to do better about that. And really, everybody in the industry needs to do better about that because we need to have more equality in this world that we're living in. And I need to be a part of that. So Rachel, I want to thank you for your review. I hope you're enjoying the early season here in the Pacific Northwest. Things really start firing here around mid-January, February. And while the snow is not as light as what you're used to in Colorado, I feel like we get more of it here in the Pacific Northwest. And on cold days, the cold smoke is as blower as it is in Colorado. It's just more plentiful, and you don't have to deal with the nightmare of I-70. We have our own nightmares here, but they're usually solved with good tires. I recommend you get some. I also recommend that you email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com with your mailing address, and I'll send you something awesome. If anybody else wants to win something awesome from me, please submit a review. If I read it on the show, you'll be a winner. You can review me anywhere you listen. I see them all. And if I had an Android, I'd tell you exactly how to review me there. But I don't. I have an iPhone. So if you have an iPhone, follow these instructions to review me. First, hit the podcast icon on your iPhone. Second, search for The Powell Movement. And even if you already subscribe, you still need to do this. Third, click on my logo. Fourth, scroll down to where you see the stars. Fifth, star rate me and review the podcast. It really helps me within the algorithm, and I thank you for taking the 30 seconds to do that. I also want to thank you for listening and want to ask you to please support the brands that make this show happen. They are Elon Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.